The story here is never take that first opinion as fact. You got to look at everything that's possible. Go in there and be the best advocate. And as long as you know you're not going to hurt them, which I knew I wasn't going to hurt him because I had all these doctors around me, my feeling is, why wouldn't you try it? You know, it's like you look at the things that people do that are so risky in terms of, surgeries and medications. Why wouldn't you try something where there's basically all upside and really no downside? It is the difference between life and death in situations like this. I mean, there's no question. Dr. Daniel Amen looked right at me when we were hanging out after Grant's SPECT scan and said, you saved your son's life. My son was out walking, and it was at dusk, and he was hit by a car, a hit-and-run driver, a woman, and estimates were about 40 miles an hour, and left for dead in the street. He was airlifted to the local hospital. He had 13 fractures, large femur fractures he was bleeding from. They had to keep giving him transfusions. He was in a coma, the deepest one, totally non-responsive. He had a torn aorta, which 90% of people who have that die on the scene, and massive road rash everywhere, lacerated kidneys, a lot of internal organ damage, skull fractures, and major brain bleeds. Our doctor told us at Desert to let him go. He'd never survive the airlift. If he survived the airlift, he'd never survive the surgery, and if he happened to survive the surgery, he'd probably never wake up, or he'd be so brain damaged it wouldn't make sense. All this for a 16-year-old boy. This man was willing to just let him go, but we weren't. So he came out. He was in a deep coma. We were told by the neurosurge team, no clue if he'd ever wake up, and if he did, what it would be like. So I sent out an email blast, Facebook blast. I know because you responded to it. Literally hundreds of thousands of people, and we immediately assembled a plan of action of what we were going to do, and I looked at it and went, what do I need to involve the hospital in, and what do I not need to involve the hospital in? And most of the things I did not need to involve the hospital in because there was no reason to have to go through their research board and all that. The only one I had to was the fish oil, and that was very challenging because they still believe, despite no evidence to ever show this, that fish oil increases bleed time. There is not one study to show that fish oil increases bleeding time. I gave them the entire documentation from Barry Sears. I had all of his studies, which of course they ignored.
If you could just comment on the challenge it was to convince them. Did the physicians ever finally accept and acknowledge that fish oil was useful?
Well, the first hospital, we came back at the end as he was leaving the second hospital. So 4.5 months out, he, walked into the second hospital. And, it was, wow, just as the doctor told me there, is one of his doctors said, hey, he's out of the coma. First, she told me that when he came out of the coma, this was the only thing she gave me. Thank God I had these other people telling me what to expect. She said, it will be ugly. That was what I was told. It will be ugly. No, nothing else. So, but then when he came out of the coma, all she told me is, now we wait. And I said, we wait? And she goes, yeah, you can't do anything to speed this up. I go, really? Not a thing, huh? And she goes, nope, not a thing. And so why bother? I mean, why bother when someone's so grounded in that viewpoint that there's nothing you can do? It's not my place. They're just going to poo-poo it as some spontaneous healing, et cetera. You can't prove anything because it's an N of 1. I know that your best, the story here is never take that first opinion as fact. You got to look at everything that's possible. Go in there and be the best advocate. And as long as you know you're not going to hurt them, which I knew I wasn't going to hurt him because I had all these doctors around me advising me, it's like, just do what you need to do. It's your kid.
Our motto on our site is to take control of your health, but obviously in this type of scenario, it's impossible for the patient to do that. So the relatives have to take control of themselves by engaging behaviors that you did and demonstrated so admirably.
It is the difference between life and death in situations like this. I mean, there's no question. Dr. Daniel Amen looked right at me when we were hanging out after Grant's SPECT scan and said, you saved your son's life. I think a lot of times people are intimidated by this.
And it's easy to be intimidated.
These people are, hey, we got wonderful care, mainly because we intimidated them back, but we got wonderful care. These are amazing people. They saved Grant's life, but they're humans and they're working long shifts and things happen and they're never going to care as much about your person, your family member as you are. So be there. Already, I think he's better than he was before. I call my son Walking Hope. He's a victor. You know, you can be a victim or a victor in life. He has literally taken this as, you know, the best thing that's ever happened to him. He walks around telling people not to accept what's, you know, being told, because he was told he'd never walk, he'd never hear, he'd never, you know, and he just says, don't accept that. My son's sprinting, he's swimming, he's stronger than ever, he's fitter than ever, and he's nice and sweet, and, you know, went back to this children's hospital at Christmas and gave presents to all the kids and told them to just keep on fighting.
Perfect. Well, thank heaven for neuroplasticity. And I understand Grant is there, so why don't we get Grant on the camera so our viewers can see Grant himself.
Okay, come on. Here he is. All right. So
hello, Grant.
There's the camera right there. Say hi to Dr. Mercola.
And everyone else.
Say hi to
Hey.
So how is it? What, I forgot to ask initially. When was your accident initially? How long ago was that?
September 10th, 2012.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're coming up about a year and a half.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are you back in school now and exercising and sports?
It's Monday. That's when it's going to be.
He's going back to school actually on Monday. We've been homeschooling. Tell him for working out. What do you do for working out?
I do usually push up. I think I can. It's easy now. I can't lift 300, but I can lift 280. But I'm getting a little better on the weight thing.
And he sprints and swings.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because your mom is not only a fitness expert, but she's also is an exercise expert, as you can tell by looking at her. So does she help guide you, or do you have someone, a personal trainer that you take care of that mentors you?
See, you should listen to me is what he's saying.
Even though I have books on different things.
He is a teenage boy, and you know how that is. They know everything.
Sure. No, I do not know everything. It doesn't work that way.
Well, terrific. Well, you're really fortunate to have a mentor like your mom to help you through this, and really an advocate for you. And I'm sure you really appreciate that.
Getting a hug.
I remember since I was a kid, I was just like, whenever somebody tells me I'm not able to, the truth is, the only time you can't is if it truly is not able to, possibly within anything around us.
Well, you know, when your son's in a coma, you're watching for everything, every finger squeeze, every eyelash flutter, anything. You're like, his eyelash, his right eyelid fluttered, right? You look for every single sign. You're holding on to anything for hope. And so because I was there 15 hours a day and watching this, you really could tell. I mean, I could tell when what was impacting. And I knew right away the essential oils were making an impact because he started to make little movements, right, when you did it. Mm-hmm. If I walked in the room, or more importantly, his then girlfriend walked in the room, his blood pressure would come down. He actually talked about when the gray man came to decide whether he wanted to live or die, he heard our voices and he heard me talking, and that's what made him decide he wanted to stay. So, I mean, there's so much more to this. You know, I mean, we had hundreds, probably millions of people praying for him. But what I will tell you is, as I started to use the progesterone, he started to make contact again. He started to look at me again. And so, you know, we first started him with a little bit of fish oil. He started to come out of the coma, then started the progesterone. He started to now make contact with us. Then we got him into the back room, and I started more fish oil and just amino acids and glutamine and high-dose vitamin C and probiotics, just a load of stuff, and some hand-eye coordination stuff and some more sensory stuff. But the big one was this. When we got him to Children's Hospital and I said, okay, he's on 20 grams of fish oil, when he was at Harbor, all he would say was, let's go, you know, or disgusting. That was one of the first things he said to the hospital food, disgusting, you know. And so, and I love you. Those were kind of his limits, but we got to Children's Hospital, got him on the fish oil at the high dose. 2 days later, I wake up in the morning and I said, did I really have a full conversation with my son in the middle of the night? And I went to the hospital and they go, yes, he called you, because I had given him back his phone early saying, okay, this is going to, you know, kind of trigger some things for him. He called me in the middle of the night and had a whole conversation with me, and he started to use sentences. So it was very clear what was going on. They were so blown away that I brought in Whole Foods. I went to Whole Foods every day and lugged this in because there was no refrigerator, and was making all these smoothies. They're like, we've never seen a parent do this. Don't you want to just give them the hospital food? And I'm like, huh? So, I mean, you look at it all, and everything from someone being with him all the time and all the sensory stuff. It's like, what worked? It all worked. It all worked. Like, do every single thing you possibly can. But if you had to make a choice, my first choice would, of course, be fish oil beyond everything else. And I think one of the biggest takeaways, especially for teenage boys who are at the highest risk for traumatic brain injury, is make sure that you've got them on a good quality fish oil. He was on, depending on the day, 2 to 5 grams. The study looked at 3 grams. And, of course,
this is prior to his accident?
Prior to the accident, for years. My feeling is, why wouldn't you try it? It's like, you look at the things that people do that are so risky in terms of, surgeries and medications. Why wouldn't you try something where there's basically all upside and really no downside?
I mean, not everyone's going to encounter acute traumatic brain injury. For those that do, Grant's experience is going to be phenomenal. But there's going to be a far larger number, by 100 or 1,000-fold, who do have someone in the hospital who could benefit from this strategy. So I wonder if you could discuss your experience with that.
Number one, get your family member out of the hospital as quickly as possible. Obviously, he couldn't. He was there for 4.5 months. But our initial biggest issue was, number one, we were in a teaching hospital, so even though it was the number 2 trauma center in the country, you had staff changing every 2 weeks, and they didn't necessarily get every piece of his medical record. So we found we were communicating a lot of it. I was there every morning at 5:30 when ground rounds started. I swear they were not. They were like, get her out of here. In there with my questions too. And I was just, my ex-husband, I would keep track of everything going on. One of us was always there because they pulled out his ventric too early. What was monitoring his brain swelling for everybody. And, there's things like that they'll make a decision. They changed some medications. I go, you do not change a medication without running it through me ever. That was it. I went on a rampage. And so you need to immediately, and granted, you might not have the immediate on your cell phone. You can call Daniel Amen or someone like that. But nowadays with the internet, we have so much access. And so you need to become an expert or find experts in that care as quickly as possible. We had them all lined up within 24 hours. And we knew what we were looking for. We were there. We were vigilant. And we asked a ton of questions because, we're the customer here. Yes. So if they're going to do something, I want to know exactly what the reasoning is, what the rationale, who's going to be there, et cetera. And you have to really be there. But, the other big risk, and it happened with Grant, is, the risk of infection in a hospital, especially when you've got central lines and a ventric and all these things, is almost 100%. And he did grow bacteria in his feeding tube, and that was one of the reasons we got to get it out, but we couldn't get it out right away because he wouldn't have had any way to get fed. But that is one of those big, big risks is that you're going to get, if you make it through all of this, that some of the hospital viruses and bacteria are what's going to take you down. So you want to make sure that you really, honestly, as soon as you can get someone out, get them out. And as soon as you can get whatever you can do to minimize it, we were always fully gloved. We made sure everybody else was fully gloved and masked and covered. We went near him. We just made a decision early on that this was going to be the best thing that ever happened to Grant, to our family, and that we were going to spread that word to as many people as possible. And so you just use every experience. Again, you don't grow from, the great times. You grow from the difficult times. And I want to get the information out there. Again, this worked in my case, but it just shows you that there are so many options available. So don't quit till you can't exhaust them. I said, as long as he's alive, I can keep going.